Hi, everyone, and welcome to my page here. I have a very special guest. Me and Leah are part of a group together, and we are definitely like looking at really understanding what each other does a little bit more. And for me, financial planning is always those that topic that I don't necessarily speak about. So I'm really grateful for Leah to bring her wisdom here because I think some of us need this expert, need to hear this from someone else to really bring those pieces together for ourselves. So, welcome. Thank you for being here, Leah.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and let me just introduce Leah. So, Leah Hadley, am I saying that right? Sorry, I should have checked.
Hadley.
Hadley, thank you, is committed to providing compassionate financial guidance through life transitions. And so she is a former investment analyst, sought after speaker, award winning financial planner. And Leah is the founder of Intentional Wealth Partners and Intentional Divorce Solutions. So she has experienced many challenges of her own in financial times in her own adult life, becoming an adoptive parent of three overnight, getting divorced, building a business from the ground up, just to name a few of them, right? And these have been times when her ability to hunt down appropriate resources and careful financial planning was critical to her peace of mind. So, just from reading this bio alone, Leah, I can really feel why it's so important for you to do what you're doing. So please tell us a little bit about you, coming into this. Where did you start? Like, where did you, tell us a bit about your story and how you navigated this for yourself and doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, I did not start in the financial world at all. My undergraduate degree is in sociology, my master's degree is in education. And I was teaching in Baltimore City schools, and I got burnt out in the classroom, and I needed a job. And so, I just got a temp job, and it happened to be for an investment bank. And I remember walking in that investment bank that very first day and feeling like everybody around me, Tammy, was speaking a different language. I had no idea what they were talking about. Now, that temp job was as an administrative assistant in the equity research department, so the department that researches individual stocks. And I was very fortunate in that I got hired on very quickly. And I had some wonderful mentors there who encouraged me to get my licensing done. And ultimately, I became a senior equity research analyst. But here I was, somebody who, was well educated. I had a master's degree. And when I walked into that investment bank, I was such a fish out of water and had such limited financial knowledge. And so to me, realizing that you can have so much education and still be lacking in this particular area was really eye opening. And so I kind of grew up in the equity research world. So, researching a lot of individual stocks and making investment recommendations to big portfolio managers, hedge fund managers, and ultimately decided I wanted to help people. I wanted to help individuals and families to really reach their financial goals. And so I made a shift. Actually, it was around the time when we were adopting our children because I really just couldn't keep up with the equity research schedule when my kids were little. And so made that shift to helping individuals and families. But ultimately, and when I made that shift, I went to one of the big investment firms that's well known. But what I found was working in those big broker dealers, you're very limited in how you can help people, Tammy. They have a way of doing business, and that's the way you do business. And really found that people in transition in particular have a lot of different needs that don't necessarily fit within that traditional broker dealer model. And so I decided to go out on my own in 2016. And it's been a wild ride building my own businesses, but it's been amazing. And I love celebrating with my clients as they reach their financial goals, being there to support them through challenging transitions. It's just all very personal, rewarding.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It's like it's true, right? So many of us are professional in our own ways, and it's like we really don't know a lot. Well, we don't know what we don't know, and so this is why
Right.
you're here today to talk to us. And so, I mean, what I'm called to ask you, these transitions of maybe like adopting three children and divorce, right, and building a business, like. what type of things, like through the lens of a financial planner, should someone be aware of? Like, yeah, whatever, which one jumps out at you that would support our audience to really understanding like what is important to look at? Like, where does one start with all of that?
Yeah. Well, with any financial transition, it's really important to have a clear sight line as far as cash flow goes. And so a lot of people don't necessarily keep a budget to know exactly where they're planning to spend their money every month. But it's important to have an idea of where you spend your money every month, even if you don't keep a budget. And the reason being is when you go through any of these transitions. So, for example, when I started the business, obviously my income was reduced for a significant period of time while I was growing the business. Well, how was I going to make ends meet if I didn't necessarily know what those ends were, right? And so, really having a clear sense of what are the bills that I have, what are my commitments, and what can I do, and also acknowledging that I'm in a transition. It's not going to last forever, but maybe we need to pull back on some discretionary spending for the time being to get through this transition to allow myself to build that income back up, right? And having that clear sight line when it comes to cash flow gives you that flexibility to know what are the strings that you can pull at this point in time. When we're not clear on, when money's coming in, where it's coming from, how much is coming in, where it's going out to, when we're not real clear on these things, we don't necessarily know what strings to pull. And so maybe I'm going to say, all right, I'm, not going to have my Starbucks anymore. But that might not really make a big difference in the big picture, right? And so we really want to see, are there maybe fixed expenses that need to come down to get through this transition, to really look at the full picture and to know where money's coming from and where it's going is absolutely critical through any transition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it makes me think like someone going through transitions. There's so much uncertainty, right? And
Mhm.
so, how does one navigate all these things if maybe they had someone else taking care of it for them, or meaning maybe the other partner, for example, right? And so, could you shed some light on this? Like, how does one, like, if they don't really literally don't know where to start, and
Yeah.
they kind of know like cash is not doing good, like what is that next step that they would, look at, place more attention on?
Yeah. So it's really important to get clear on your assets and liabilities. So assets are what you own, liabilities are what you owe. And so to have that clear picture of these are my savings accounts, these are my investment accounts, these are my retirement accounts, these are my credit card bills, these are my student loan payments, these are my vehicle loan payments, my mortgage, etc. So to know exactly how much each thing is worth, and to know if there are monthly like payment amounts or monthly contributions that are going into those things, that you're really clear on what those are. And then again, from a cash flow standpoint, knowing exactly where money's coming from, when it's coming, and how much, and where it's going, what your financial commitments are. But also, a big thing when people want to feel financially secure, one of the most important things they can focus on is building up savings. Savings, having cash in the bank, having liquid access to money, gives you freedom and flexibility. And so, a lot of times when people are going through a transition, they may be pulling down savings, pulling it out in order to deal with things that they maybe hadn't planned for, or they might be running up credit card bills for things that they hadn't planned for. But if you really are paying attention to income and expenses and you're paying attention to cash that's available, that's really important to give you that financial security.
Yeah, yeah, I can see how like just putting your intention and attention on all these things, it brings us back to a sense of power, I would imagine, right?
Right.
Because it's like depending where we're at, like whether we're revisiting that or we're just doing it for the first time, it yeah, it can feel very overwhelming. Yeah, it's something that we must do, to really get
Right.
back on the wagon, to empower ourselves again, things like this. And so, what are some of the common challenges that your clientele, like, that you support people through?
Yeah. So I support people through a variety of different life transitions. I have a specialty in supporting people through divorce. We do a lot of work on retirement planning and helping people to make that transition, people for caring for their elderly parents. So there's a lot of different kinds of transitions that we work through with people. I would say most of the time when people are going through these big life changes, there are a lot of overwhelming emotions that they're dealing with that make it really difficult to have a clear head when you're dealing with the finances. And we really want to look at the finances with an objective mind as much as possible and not with that emotional brain. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that I see is really like calming down the emotions and having space to really make these financial decisions with clarity. Especially because honestly, Tammy, a lot of my clients don't like talking about money. They don't want to deal with it. A lot of them would just rather, put their head in the sand and not have to deal with it. But it's so important. And you're right, it's so empowering to find that this is an area where you can be really in control in your life.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, right, to realize that, especially in this place of transition, like yeah, you could really be overpowered by, yeah, it's a very emotional place with any transition in life, in fact. And so, and I believe when we talked about before, Leah, you have that, you said it in your bio, very compassionate, almost like you're probably in some ways you're leading that compassionate ear to really hold someone through the process versus being in a very logical place all the time. Yes, you do bring that, of course, because someone needs to like, take hold someone's hand to guide them through this process and to look at the bigger picture. Because when we're stressed, we can only see like literally what's in front of us, and so that's a big value that I could see you bringing to all of this. And so I'm curious, could you? I don't know. I feel like um, many of us learn a lot through a case study, like hearing like beginning to end, like to really visualize how this process can unfold with expert. Can you share a case study that you worked with someone from maybe beginning to the end?
Absolutely. So I have been so fortunate to work with lots of folks who are transitioning from corporate work to owning their own business. It's a particular area for me that I just really enjoy because of my own journey. And so I can relate in a lot of ways. And so I had a client who came to me who was really looking to make this transition. What we did was took a look at where her finances were. What was her income? What were her expenses? What were her financial commitments? What had she accumulated in terms of assets? And what were her debts? And how could we best position her so she could make this transition, acknowledging that her income was going to drop for a significant period of time as she invested in the business and started to then grow that business. And so what we determined was exactly how much runway she needed and could afford. And so ultimately determined that she could afford about 2 years of runway, but we needed her to stay in her current role for about a year to clear up some debt and to make some adjustments to some of her fixed expenses. So that way she had better cash flow when she left the corporate job and switched to running her own business. But then she had those 2 years of runway, and we continued to work together as she built the business. And she now has a thriving business. She's able to pay herself regular income. She's still able to invest in the business. And she's really being able to, be in control of her income in a lot of different ways, but also her schedule. She has aging parents and needs to spend quite a bit of time with them. And so this transition was really important for her, not only to be able to start her own business, but to have the flexibility to be able to be with her aging parents.
Yeah, and it's so true. And if she didn't do this planning, right, she wouldn't have been able to do all of that. And this is the power exactly that we don't think about, right? And planning
Right.
for, we're thinking about, excuse me, doing what, feels good to us and matters to us and like wanting to, transition and create a better quality of life. Yet yeah, it's sad because it is true. Many of us are not looking at the money side of things and doing the planning ahead of time and making the appropriate investments. And so, yeah, that's really, and even for me as I'm listening to this right now, it's really opening my eyes into things that I don't tend to think about. So, thank you for being here once again, Leah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Leah, like when you're working with people in the sense of, I mean, obviously, it's looking at the assets and liability side of things, and what can you shed some light on in the sense of like where's the best place to maybe place investments in transitions when someone has some in to pay for what's needed in the ongoing daily sense of life. Um, and that's probably a question that opens up a lot of different contexts. But I'm curious, where would you go
Yeah.
with that?
So, when you're going through a transition, I always tell people it's a period, it's a season of your life. It's not your whole life. And a lot of times we're making reactive decisions financially based on this one moment in time, this one season that we're in. And it's really important that we consider our long term financial security as well. So, for example, a lot of times people will want to draw on retirement accounts when they're going through a transition, but then they are setting themselves up for an insecure retirement, right? And so looking at everything, not just what is this moment in time, what are the assets and the liabilities, but what do these mean for your future? And really being clear about where you have some room to draw on these things and where you really want to be very careful, especially for those who are a little bit older, might be approaching retirement or already in retirement. If you're pulling those retirement assets in a meaningful way, you might not be able to have your money last you for your lifetime, which is something that's really important as we look at retirement planning. And so that's very, very common. I mentioned earlier, people tend to take on a lot of debt when they're going
Mhm.
through transitions, just because again, there's no planning, and so it's just
Mhm.
I have these expenses I have to deal with. I'm going to run it through a credit card or get a personal loan or something to manage these things. And that, on
Mhm.
the other side, leaves you in a tough cash flow position because then you have all this debt to pay off. And so, really looking at, how can we build up savings if we have the runway to plan for a transition? And a lot of times people can actually plan for these things, even though they don't necessarily feel like they can. Especially, I notice with some of my clients who are switching from a corporate job to starting their own business, a lot of times they're just fed up, they've had enough. And so it's like now.
Yeah.
But if we can really plan and look at things, right, we can make sure that you're building up cash reserves so you have a more runway. We can make sure that you're paying off any existing debt, especially any high interest rate debt, so that way you don't have that as a drag on
Mhm.
your cash flow. And really looking at how am I prepared for my future as well as how am I prepared for today. Now, some people actually have saved huge amounts in retirement, and it is safe for them to draw on those, but it really varies widely based on somebody's situation.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And um, so in the sense of, craft like retirement, like what are sort of ranges for people and what they, should have ideally have at certain stages of their life in, let's say business. I think you work with people in business in general, right?
Yeah, so it really is going to vary based on lifestyle and where you live significantly. Also, what age at which you want to retire. So, I have several younger clients who want to retire at younger ages, some of them as young as like 45 years old. And that's a very different retirement plan than somebody who wants to retire at 65 years old, right? Because if you're trying to fund the rest of their life, obviously there has to be a different plan in place because that's a much longer time period that we're looking at. But some of my clients have significant wealth, but live on very modest amount of money, and some of my clients are spenders, and so they may not have accumulated as much wealth. And on top of that, they spend at a much higher level. So those are the kinds of things when we're planning for people's retirement. We're really looking at what age are we planning for? What does spending look like? We certainly build inflation into that picture as well, and what does your life expectancy look like? So we talk with folks about their family history and how long people live in their family, because there are people living well into their hundreds at this point. And
Sure.
again, we don't want you to run out of money, and so we always want to be more conservative and assume you're going to live longer rather than being assuming that you're not going to live as long and then potentially running out of money.
Yeah, and if you were to lay out, all these pieces, I mean, of and I don't know if this is like a appropriate even thing to ask, but like to just shed some light on the different products that are out there. What is like a must um, as a general? Like I know there's different contexts, but I'm just trying to get a sense so people can we can paint a picture for people. And so, what
Yeah.
products are really a necessity, and what you see going on? People living longer, change, so much change happening in people's lives. People changing careers so often in their life, and so I'm curious. Like, is there an answer you have for that?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend a specific product, but I will say investing is critical to keeping up with inflation and to having your money grow quicker than inflation. And so sometimes people are very nervous about investing, but just saving money, cash in a bank, loses purchasing power over time. And so it's really important that you're not keeping too much money in cash and that you are investing. So that way, at a minimum, you're keeping up with inflation and hopefully you are exceeding inflation. That's critical because prices are going up every year. And especially once you retire, if your income is fixed or not growing very quickly, you really need your other assets to be growing quicker to be able to keep up with inflation.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious in the sense of when you're working with people, what do they think they know that they don't know? Because I think there's a
That's
lot of times, you know what I'm trying to say? Because there's that, many of us think we know it. Oh, I heard that already. Yeah. So what do they think they know that they don't know?
That's such an interesting question. And one of the things that I find really fascinating that comes up pretty regularly when I review somebody's investment portfolio, everybody has heard diversification, 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 right? So not to keep all your eggs in one basket, not to hold just one, type of investment. And so what people will do is they will hold multiple investments, but what they don't realize is the underlying investments that they're holding are actually the same. And so it's really important to understand when you're investing in your retirement account, could be, your employer retirement account, maybe you have an IRA or a Roth IRA, that when you're selecting your investments, in order to actually diversify, you can't have the same funds holding the same underlying investments, that you are actually having exposure to different areas. And that's one that it comes up very regularly when I'm doing investment portfolio reviews.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that's a new one for me as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Leah, I'm curious. I know you prepared a wonderful gift for our audience, but I'm curious. Before we wrap up our conversation, I'm curious if there's something that any sort of tip or insight or last words that you want to share with our audience today.
I think the biggest thing is just not to be afraid to talk about money. A lot of times people will tell me they've been watching me or following me for a year before they reached out. And especially if you're going through a transition, the sooner you talk with somebody, the better. Even if it's in that planning phase, right? We talked about how important it is to really get some planning in place before you make these transitions, if possible. And so I would just encourage people to not be afraid to talk about money, not be afraid to reach out. That there are lots of financial advisors like myself who are very compassionate. There are some who are not. And if you get a response that you don't feel comfortable with, move on. Find somebody that you feel comfortable working with, because that's a reflection of them and not a reflection of you.
Yeah, it's very true. I've definitely came across many that are just too much in the headspace. There's too yeah, I don't know what the right word is, but you get a sense when you meet someone if they're a good fit for you. And I think, I assume, Leah, that you offer some sort of consultation in the beginning, right? And so it's so important
Absolutely.
just to have that conversation, whether, it's reaching out to Leah on a direct message just to get a sense and feel. Because we like to work with people that, we want to get a sense of them, and we want to build that trust factor, and sometimes that starts with just the message, and we could get that sense already. And so yeah, like Leah like offers, this consultation. It's a beautiful place just to get a sense and feel, and really to just calm your nerves, with through the transition, knowing that she is holding this compassionate space, but also to walk you through what this all looks like, so that you can take your power back, and
Right.
to feel that you're not alone. Because at the end of the day, we're human. We're human beings meeting another human being that hopefully cares about us as a human. And from what I learned from Leah and connecting with her so far, she's definitely this. And so, yeah, just putting that out there for people. And so, Leah, if people want to get a hold of you, where would you like them to go? Where you want to direct them to?
So intentionalwealthpartners.co is our main website, and you can schedule a consultation right on that website. We also have for you a free retirement planning checklist.
Hmm.
So you can actually go through and see what you're currently doing relative to the checklist, see maybe where there's some holes and where you can really start to beef up your retirement plan. And this is important for everybody. This is not necessarily for somebody who's 5 years away from retirement. The sooner you get started on this stuff, the easier it is. And honestly, the less it costs you because you can have your money doing the work for you. And so the retirement planning checklist is really for everybody. And we also have a retirement planning workshop coming up in just a couple of weeks. And so if you get that checklist, you'll also get information about the workshop, which I'm really excited about later this month.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah, because I love checklists because it just, allows you to see the big picture in many ways and see where you're at and to really, yeah, start with where you're at too, right? And so I love that you have this planning workshop coming up as well. And very true that is never too early to start,
Yeah,
not to wait for a transition if possible, right? And so
right.
thank you so much, Leah, for sharing your knowledge and being here. And yeah, it really opened my eyes to see things a little differently and different perspectives. So thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you for having me, Tammy. It's been my pleasure.